I'm Nikki at the Tanner Steffler Foundation, and we're going to talk about depression. So can you just tell us first your experience with depression?
At the time, I didn't really realize that I was going through depression. I don't think anyone else really noticed that I was kind of struggling with that. I just kind of felt like I was in a funk, and I kind of just saw this like, oh, like you're having a bad week, and then I kind of turned like, oh, like kind of like feeling the same like after a month, and I was like, I need to kind of like make a change here. I didn't realize I didn't have a good grasp on like mental awareness, mental health for myself.
Back in high school, grade 11, my second semester, I ended up losing a classmate to suicide. And so over the course of that year, I started experiencing what I would later understand was the symptoms of depression. So over that year, I started becoming kind of colder, more disconnected to my friends. I even eventually started having suicidal thoughts. Almost exactly a year later, after I lost my first friend to suicide, I lost a second friend to suicide. And that was when things really started to get bad. I had started, a couple months before that, I finally started getting to do therapy and stuff, but I ended up losing a lot of my progress, and I went to probably one of the darkest places in my life. Over the following months, I was suicidal on a regular basis. I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. It was just a constant battle, I would say. And going through therapy, eventually getting on medication, and getting into things like workout regimes and becoming more mindful and all these things. Unfortunately, nothing was really improving, and at some points it even felt like it was getting worse. And it wasn't really until I left to go to university and continued my therapy that I eventually became symptom-free, and just a couple of years ago I was finally able to get off my medication.
Depression on its own has really kind of like permeated my entire life, and a lot of that has to do with growing up with mentally ill parents as well. So my mom's clinically depressed, and it's kind of, genetically passed down to me and my siblings.
How was it when you first started to talk about it? Did you find it hard to kind of admit to yourself or to others that you had depression?
I knew what it was and what was going on with me from a very young age. I knew the first time my mom attempted, I was 7.
Wow.
And so I was very understanding of what was going on, what I was feeling. But I had convinced myself that, if I don't, just don't deal with it, just move on, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
I kind of almost dug myself deep.
Yeah.
Hole. So it got to a point kind of where it all culminated, and I had to realize within myself that this isn't something I'm going to be able to live with without getting help.
There was this huge relief because the way I was feeling, I was able to validate my feelings. Finally talking to a therapist who was able to affirm that everything I was feeling and all these things that had happened over the years and all these, symptoms that it wasn't fake, that, everything was real and that it was okay to feel that way.
Yeah.
Because, it generally didn't feel like, I should be feeling that way and there was something wrong with me and that it was my fault.
Yep.
But being able to talk to others and eventually, doing more public speaking and everything, it's just seeing that it helped other people and that other people were experiencing this. It just all kind of came together to make it feel more normal because it is something that's normal.
100%.
So,
what were the things that got you through your hardest days? Maybe for people out there who are right now in their hardest days, what were those things that, got you out of bed and got you kind of rolling with your days?
The biggest thing that really helped me get through it all was my support group, the people who were there for me, the people I could fall back on the days where I felt like I couldn't do anything, where I could barely get out of bed in the morning, where it was like a mental marathon running through my day. They were the ones I could fall back on who, if I wasn't able to do the things I needed to, they could help me.
Yeah.
And, if I was suicidal, we had a plan set out and they would be there for me and they would have everything I needed. Just holding on to that and just taking every day as I could and knowing that, on a bad day, tomorrow could be better.
Yeah.
And if tomorrow's not going to be better, then maybe the day after.
What was it like to experience that in a school system when maybe mental health wasn't as talked about then as it is now?
It was tough, especially because at that age, like most people in, say, grade 10 or 11, you don't really know the vocabulary around, you know, what you're feeling or really what mental health is. Something I think the Tanner Steffler Foundation could be a part of changing is letting people in their youth, like in high school, get a better understanding of the vocabulary that surrounds mental health.
I think back to high school, and I remember there's a person that came in from the board office, and she talked about mental health and how she was here. It was new at the time, like having someone dedicated to working towards that, and it was very new. And you know, all of a sudden I just started asking her a lot of questions, and they didn't really have the answer to them either, which is normal. Not everyone's gonna have an answer to it.
Right.
But the biggest thing I found looking back is, like, there's an educator, there's yourself, and there's your peers. But they all have to work together. Like, we do mental health weeks during school, but your teachers, they sit and watch everyone in the gym interact on an activity. It's not the same. And you don't even know, like, my teachers in high school, are they, the older generations, like, they were taught a lot differently about awareness for that. So I feel like, yeah, that has a big impact.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest issues is, you know, even though it's improved over the years, is just awareness and just like education about it. Even though people have heard, you know, the words like depression and anxiety and stuff like that more over the years, you know, it's still something that's taboo. It's still not quite talked about as much as it should be. And just like encouraging the schools and communities and stuff to add services and give more funding to the services that are there, because a lot of them are so overwhelmed and it's ridiculously hard to get, you know, what people need. And, you know, if it's still not something that's constantly talked about and isn't 100% normalized as something as simple like in the way that, you know, a cold or something would be, then, you know, the services still aren't going to be put in place for it, you know. Like, anybody thinks, you know, when you're at school, say you get injured, you hurt your leg or something, you just go visit the nurse or whatever, right? But if you're at school and you're having suicidal thoughts, nobody thinks, oh, I'll just go down to the therapist, right? Because it's not something people know enough about. It's not something that's available enough, and it's not just easy enough that you can just go and walk in somewhere and do that in those places.
How did stigma affect you?
Around the time when my friends took their lives, mental health was just starting to get talked about, and so even after everything happened, it was still a taboo topic. It was something that nobody talked about. So during my time where I just wasn't really educated on anything about mental health, I just didn't really know that I had depression. I didn't know that, you know, everything that was happening to me was wrong. And that was even more difficult with my depression because it helped feed into this negative belief I had that, you know, I was faking my symptoms, that I was exaggerating, that I was just doing it for attention. Even at the points where I was suicidal, but like I didn't want to come forward. I didn't want to be the weirdo. I didn't want to affect my future down the line. I didn't want, you know, my family to look at me different, especially because, you know, even in my own family, mental health is nothing that we've really ever talked about.
Yeah.
You know, suicide was a word that probably been mentioned a handful of times throughout my life before that.
Being a male, and also being in the closet for most of my life, you know, you really shove those things.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something you can really crack at like 16 talking to a high school counselor.
100%.
Yeah, it's something that takes a lot of time.
What advice would you give to somebody who is dealing with depression right now?
Just hold out. You know, depression, it's one of the most difficult battles I've ever fought, but I didn't have to fight it alone. I had the people who were there for me, and there's so many people who, you know, around you who are experiencing it and that you probably don't even know. And so reaching out, there's so many people who will be there for you to fall back on. You know, you don't have to take this weight with you every single day because it is so much for one person to handle. You're not alone through this. You know, I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
If you ever feel like you're stuck in that deep depressive episode, just know that those emotions die away. They do not live forever.
Yeah.
They fade and you will move on. And there's always more opportunity for help down the road.
Yeah.
You know, if when you are depressed and you're in that state, you feel hopeless. You know, it's a lack of it's a lack of anything. You feel hollow.
Yeah.
But those feelings disappear and they get replaced with other ones, and it's important to know that, you know, you're not always going to feel sad. You're not always going to feel hopeless.
Have the conversation with yourself and realize, like, I'm going through something and that it's okay to talk to somebody. But, like, when you talk to someone, they're going to be there to help you, but you also have to be open to want to make those changes.
You being vulnerable with us today is going to change the lives of a lot of people. And I hope that, you know, people see this and feel like the courage to speak out.